Welcome to AI to the Sky, the global podcast on artificial intelligence, automation, and the future of business, hosted by Joseph Vale.
This episode is powered by Rocket AI. WhatsApp bans costing you sales? Rocket AI automates messaging legally with AI. Your competition's already using it. rocketai.lat.
Hello, followers. This is another episode of AI to the Sky. They said that in the era of AI, the most powerful asset isn't the algorithm. It's the human brain that knows how to use it. Today's guest has spent over 2 decades proving exactly that. She has trained more than 2,000 global leaders, designed a CPT accredited applied neuroscience method, and what I personally admire, she blends modern science and with ancient wisdom to help leaders scale without losing their soul. It's an honor to welcome Reena Dayal, a woman who is rewriting the playbook for leadership in times of disruption, uncertainty, and of course, artificial intelligence. Welcome, Reena.
Thank you, Joseph. I absolutely adore your introduction. It's absolutely brilliant. And the name of your podcast, AI to the Sky. So many possibilities out there. And as you correctly said, it is a question about us really discovering and unpacking the human brain rather than the algorithm that the AI can master and perhaps do better than we can.
Yeah, of course. These times are changing so fast, right?
Very rapidly, absolutely. It is at an astonishingly accelerated space. But therein lies the opportunity, I guess.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, Rita, tell us, where are you and where are you from?
So I'm actually from India, tiny little town in East India, which was one of India's first industrial town created for the iron and steel company by the House of Tatas, which right now
Oh,
is a massive organization and conglomerate which has things right from the Tata Consultancy Services to Jaguar, Land Rover, and manufacturing. So massive, massive organization. And they built a township, and that's the township that I come from, which is called Jamshedpur. So India is where I come from, but I'm based in the UK right now.
oh, that's interesting. Sounds good. So, right now in the UK, you were saying to me that it's kind of hot, right?
Great weather. I would say hot. When somebody comes from a place like India, the definition of hot is very different in summer than the hot that
Oh,
we have
yeah, for
here.
sure.
But yes, it's been pretty decent and good weather in the UK. The sun is shining, which is nice, more than it is raining. And so it's been a good month of August. And August is also a holiday season, which, as I was sharing with you, is a great time to get personal projects done because business is usually low. And it's nice to get time to do that and just relax a little bit before the busy season begins.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. You were catching up. So, Rina, you've spent years combining neuroscience with leadership. In simple terms, how can leaders rewire their brains to make faster and maybe better decisions in uncertain times?
What a great question. So, can I just unpack a little bit about what I mean by neuroscience of leadership as well, in the context of giving the answer to your absolutely pertinent question? Because people are right now, the leaders right now are navigating some really high stakes environment with some amazing opportunities as well. So, for me, I think the neuroscience of leadership is all about really understanding how the brain controls the way we lead, which means how we make decisions, how do we problem solve, how we behave under pressure, how do we manage stress, how do we influence other people, how do we innovate, how do we create winning cultures. in fact, everything, right from the short, medium, long-term bottom lines and success of businesses. And that's what leaders are really managing right now. But as you correctly said, you use the word rewiring. And I think so. One of the amazing abilities of the brain is the principle of adaptation. In neuroscience, the word that's used is neuroplasticity, which is the ability to rewire, which means we can think differently, we can choose to respond differently. So, for example, one of the techniques that I often use with clients is something known as the Neurocircuit Breakers and reframes technique. Because what the brain does is, because it is an efficient organ, it's an efficient and amazing machinery that we have, but it also uses up a lot of our energy. So, therefore, to be efficient, any behaviors or reactions which we do time and again, it tends to embed it in what we call the default network, the default way of responding, which becomes the old habits and old reactions, especially when we are under stress. And in high stake environments, people are under stress, right? So we automatically behave in a particular way. But if we can raise awareness, so through the technique, what we do is raise awareness about what's the current way that leaders are responding to a particular environment, which is a stressful environment, and how they might choose to react differently so that they can make better decisions. So let me make it really real for an example, like a client that I was working with as a leader who realized that when tough calls had to be made or difficult decisions had to be made, he tended to get into a delay mode because his brain was locked into thinking about risk scenarios and he was spiraling towards it, and therefore he was delaying making tough decisions. But once he became aware of it, because it was an auto response that he was not even aware that he was doing, he thought he was just making great decisions, is once he became aware of it, he used the loop, which is the neurocircuit breaker and reframe technique, to begin to stop that methodology. So he broke that original circuit and redefined how he might respond in the moment. And by raising awareness and practicing that loop, he was able to make better decisions and sharper decisions. In fact, the team started responding to him and saying, you feel kind of a little sharper right now in the way of decisions that you're making. And the more he did it, it became a habit. So he practiced doing that technique. And as he became better, a new way of thinking emerged and a new way of making decisions under pressure emerged. And that is what we call by rewiring. So if leaders can start figuring what is their default mechanism under stress and find new ways of responding to it, they'll realize that they're actually expanding the way that they can make decisions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And in this kind of era, it's really important what you are saying.
Yeah, exactly. Even on the topic of AI, if I may just take it slightly further, because I know that today's conversation about AI, sometimes when we look around, everybody is having this fear response to AI. But actually, it's not that we fear AI, it's actually what fear does to us. The minute we start fearing something, what happens is that our brain, by auto reflex, goes into what we call the panic mode. So there is this well-known author and a person who's known as the guru of emotional intelligence. He calls it the amygdala hijack. So the part of the brain that gets hijacked. And so we go into the panic mode, which is the fight, flight, freeze mode. And when we do that, what happens is our creativity goes offline, our innovation dies down, and our decision making gets limited. So when we are fearing something, we think we are making good decisions, but actually we're just making fast decisions really badly. So to be able to slow down and regulate ourselves in that moment, which is a high pressure situation, or when we are fearing something, becomes vitally important, because then only can we reframe or re-look at what AI can bring to their table, rather than look at through the lens of fear.
So you are saying that when we are experimenting fear, it's it's maybe we are kind of shocked, right?
Yeah.
And we are unable to think in a proper manner.
Yeah, we're able to think, but only through a limited way. So when
Mhm,
we are
mhm,
shocked, I love that word shock that you bring in because that's so beautiful. So when we are, whether we are fearful or when we are anxious or when we are, uncertainty is there, which is what we see are things that are around where AI is concerned. What happens, we go into a default, as you say, the shock, it's an auto reflex, and this is not personality led. This is automatically that a brain goes into that shock mode. And what it does is it either does a variation of a fight response or a flight response or a freeze response. So it switches off. Actually, a part of the brain can do the magical thing of creation and innovation and collaboration and risk taking. All of that shuts down. And so then we're going into the fight, flight, freeze. And actually, I've got a list out here if you want, because I was just making notes for our podcast about the kind of things that my clients talk about, which will really make it
mhm,
clear about how people respond under stress. So when we are under stress, whether it's AI or anything else, and I think so, our listeners will probably recognize, if not themselves, certainly their colleagues behaving in that particular way. So the common behaviors when somebody's having a fight response is that they'll argue in meetings, they'll be snapping and be irritable, they'll be defensive when giving feedback, they'll try to micromanage and control, they'll get sarcastic, passive aggressive behavior will take place, they'll be quick to blame other people, there'll be excessive competitiveness between there. So, it's a hostile environment that people start noticing. That's a fight response because the brain is thinking that there's a threat that's there, right?
mhm,
A
mhm,
flight could be things like avoiding meetings and conversations, ignoring emails and messages that are being sent to them, procrastinating on important things, getting busy, what I call productive procrastination, busy to do everything other than the important things that need to be addressed, which is so common
yeah.
sometimes, changing the subject to deflect, working in isolation, trying to kind of almost get into these are flight responses. And what's really happening is the brain is
Oh.
trying to avoid the threat it is perceiving. So it's a mechanism that's built in. And a freeze response could be things like being very silent in discussions. So they're present but withdrawn, right? Or
Mhm.
unable to kind of make decisions. They're almost like blanking out. They're nodding but not really there in the room and not really engaging with what the problem is. Almost feeling paralyzed by, I don't know what to do, indecision, like so many things. I don't know how to handle AI. I don't know what to do. What happens if the job goes, they go into that freeze kind of a mode, almost emotionally withdrawn. So those are typically freeze responses. So there's low energy. It's almost like it's out of my control. I can't do anything. So these responses are extremely natural. And so we can't fight against it. So our body is wired and our brain is wired to respond in this way. It's not personality led. But and that's where my craft comes in of applied neuroscience. If we recognize and
Mhm.
understand how the brain works, we will find ways to get out of those loops that we automatically get into. And when we can get out of that loop of reacting in that manner, is when we can really make those radically bold decisions, be imaginative, really augment AI rather than be fearful of it. So it's a different ball game altogether. Our executive functioning is par excellence. So that's the opportunity, I think, so that all of us have
Oh.
in being able to use our brain in a better way.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm sure that almost all entrepreneurs are facing this. And you're saying that maybe understanding or try to understand this in a better way, we can avoid burnout also, right?
Completely, absolutely. So, what it really is burnout? Burnout is an outcome. So, from a neuroscience and neurobiology perspective, burnout happens when there's too much of adrenaline and cortisol in the body. And so, our body is using a kind of energy or chemicals in our body, which is adrenaline and cortisol, which at a molecular level is very destructive And when we have too much of adrenal and cortisol, it leads to things like high blood pressure, diabetes, stress, burnout, exhaustion, fatigue. And actually, if you look around, you'll find that many people are experiencing that because they're
Yeah.
always trying to work from a survival mode. And when we are in a fight, flight, freeze, it uses adrenal and cortisol. So that's where the connection takes place. Now, here's the interesting thing, especially you talked about leaders who are like scale up founders and entrepreneurs. For most of those individuals, their business is almost like their baby. It's like their dream, their
Yeah.
aspiration, right? So there's a lot of vested interest, they're emotionally attached with it. And so it is natural for them to be extremely protective. And therefore, it becomes very important for them to be able to regulate the way that they are working and the techniques that they have and the habits they have, because they can very quickly spiral into exhaustion. And simple things like, people saying, and which is true, and I think so I've been an entrepreneur as well, and I still fall trap to it, we're all human, is
Yeah.
sometimes you don't sleep that much, right? And sleep deprivation that you and I know leads to bad decisions. We don't make good decisions when we are not slept very well, or our eating patterns are kind of impacted. And that's so common with scale up entrepreneurs and even for leaders right now. So therefore, it becomes really important to start understanding what kind of habits do we have that not only helps us break out of that negative adrenal cortisol loop that can take us towards burnout, but also bring in habits and lifestyles that make us think better and do
Yeah.
better and act better and lead better and make better decisions and really have radical innovation in our lives, which is a different energy. And the chemicals that we use for that are chemicals such as dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, which is a different chemistry to adrenal and cortisol. So
Yeah.
it's
And
almost ready. Sorry,
yeah, and
please go ahead.
especially, what do you think, especially in this kind of era, because I call it an AI era, because there's too much noise outside. There's too much information that, let's talk about entrepreneurs. For example, you can search on these LLMs, ChatGPT, Gemini, and many others. You can search many information. And if you don't take the good way, you are going to go farther to another way because there's too much information. There's too much, I don't know. I think at some point they are going to feel lost with this kind of information, right?
Yeah, that's so true. And the reason why that happens, and it's a really good point that you're making, Joseph, because especially today with the access to information over our devices and ChatGPT and Google and I don't know how many versions of information that is available to us, there is a tendency for us to be curious and learn more and more, and that's
Mhm.
great. The problem is not the learning bit. The problem is how much time we are spending on devices. One, that's the problem because when we're doing that, we're using only a part of our brain. So it gets exhausted. Second is a concept that's now become very evident through neuroscience, and actually this connects with also ancient wisdom, is that actually we have more than one brain. So the brain that reads and takes in information, the one that we are most trained to use is what we call the brain between our ears, which does a lot of cognitive thinking, right? So the prefrontal cortex, which is behind our forehead, that's the one that does that area of the brain is responsible for things like problem solving, analyzing, decision making. So it absorbs a lot of information. So when we are studying, that's the part of the brain that we're using. But the whole brain system shows that neurons are shot through our body. So there are neurons in our heart, there's neurons in our gut, there's neurons in our skin, but we're never trained to use it. So what happens is that we think we are educating ourselves, which is true to some extent, but we're not really engaging the whole brain system. So you can see how we are limited in the kind of intelligence we're using. We think we are being more intelligent, but it's like saying I'm being intelligent by using just one source. Would it not be better if we had practices in our life, which is where ancient practices like mindfulness, meditation, the right kind of eating, sleep that we are talking about, was always seen as vitally important for the whole brain system to work. And I wish leaders and all of us would do more of that, because then we start really expanding our sources of intelligence rather than just one source, which is let's go down the rabbit hole of looking at ChatGPT and learning more and more and more in there. This is great, but then you're missing out the gifts that the whole brain system brings in. So I think my invitation is really for everybody to think about, when they're trying to learn, what are the different ways that they're trying to learn? And if they want to use more of their brain, can they redefine what they mean by the brain? Because especially in today's day and age, in the world of the AI, as your lovely podcast is really talking about, we think we are competing with AI on the aspect of logical and analytical thinking. And you and I know where AI is concerned, it can beat us hands down on things such as data analysis, logical analytical thinking, strategy modeling, because it just has, not that it can do it better, but it can just do it for hours without any interruption and downtime, right? So if we're going to try to do linear thinking, which is logical analytical thinking, and think we can beat AI with it, then we have lost the game. So the game that we really need to do is that how can we be really becoming better at non-linear thinking? Because on those non-linear thinking, which are things like using your imagination, using your whole brain system, such as emotions, intuition, really sensing what's happening in the system, using your energy in a different way. If we can tap into that, then we can start playing a game which is very different to AI. And then the partnership becomes very different, because it's almost like, can we get AI to do all the rough bit, or all the heavy load, all the heavy lifting of data can AI do, and we can do things which AI can't do, which is vision, storytelling, imagination, thinking of things out of the blue. AI can never do that. AI will always look at data sets and create something, whereas a human being can literally sit and look up at the stars and think of an idea which has never come into the minds of anybody else. That's the power, that's the difference that we have. And that's the bit that is the invitation for us in the world of AI. But sadly, most organizations, my background is business management. I did my MBA and then I started working in companies, and all of us are trained to problem solve and be really good at logical analytical thinking, which was great 30 years ago when I passed my MBA. But in the world of AI, that's actually not the only thing that you need to be good at.
Yes, you're right. You're right. There are many other things that we can learn to handle in this AI era. So, Reena, you train top executives during high pressure moments. What does neuroscience say about how stress affects decision making, and how can leaders build real resilience?
Lovely. I'm going to connect the dots to something that we spoke at the start of the podcast and continue the narrative from there. So remember, I talked about that when we are under stress or high stakes environment, which a lot of leaders are experiencing at this moment of time in the so-called VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertainty, chaotic, ambiguous, that kind of a world. Uh, they go into a fight, flight, freeze. So just from a neuroscience perspective, what's happening, and when I'm coaching clients and as part of the CPD accredited program that you talked about on the applied neuroscience methodology that I have, we have this concept known as the PFC Limbic Seesaw. So what really happens is that when I am under stress and my limbic reaction has taken over, which means I am now having a fight, flight, or freeze response because of the uncertainties of the high stake environments, it's like a seesaw. When that part of the brain lights up, so the amygdala in the limbic system lights up because it has sensed threat, and therefore it's gone into a fight, flight, freeze. It switches off the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning of the brain, which is what we were referring to earlier. And therefore, what happens is, for leaders to make better decisions, one of the things that we work towards is how do you switch on the PFC and switch off the limbic, because the seesaw is working, right? So the limbic system has gone high, the PFC is switched off. It's like, can I change the seesaw so the PFC can switch on? And why I want to switch on the PFC is because the basic job of a leader is executive functioning, which is problem solving, analyzing, and doing all of this lovely stuff, creating, imagination, innovation, or being a visionary, all of those elements. So therefore, when we are working with leaders, is to help them understand how they can switch on their PFC so that they can make better decisions. But the other element that you're talking about is how they can be much more better in leadership per se, i.e., be visionary leaders in today's world. And that requires them, as you said, to build up resilience from a mind-body connection. So thus far, we've always had the impression that the body is there, which really carries the brain around. But as I mentioned earlier, it's actually an integrated process. So if I really want to start behaving in a much more visionary manner, I need to be able to, for example, use my intuition or use my emotions. Now, emotions is got such a bad press. It's got a label. People are like, don't be so emotional about a particular decision. We forget that emotions is a very strong data point. In fact, everything that human beings do, so this is nothing to do with a particular individual, at a species level, anything that you and I experience first goes through that part of the brain, which is the emotional cortex. So if we do not recognize, if you're not aware, if you're trying to suppress our emotions, then actually we have lost the first source of intelligence. So rather, we need to be able to recognize our emotions, regulate it, harness it, and maybe leverage it as well. So one of the things that I really turn people is that how can you turn emotions into a source of intelligence? And leaders could do that by simply asking people in the room, how are you feeling about this particular challenge? Or asking them a question about what is your intuition telling you about this particular challenge or project that we're talking about. These are words that typically have never been encouraged in organization. I was working with a team of leaders and they said, you know what, it's really strange because once they understood the science, they were like, oh my gosh, what we have been doing is when somebody in the room says in a team meeting that, you know what, I'm intuitively feeling that we're doing something wrong, we turn to the person and said, set it, put your intuition aside, give me logic. Or if somebody is saying, I'm feeling uncomfortable, like, oh, you're just being emotional. Can we just be a little bit more analytical and logical about this problem? So, we are shutting down information and intelligence that can come to us. And actually, if leaders can simply start asking that question in team meetings, and listen actively, they'll start listening to information which logic and analysis cannot have access to, because that's a different way of thinking. That's a different part of thinking, that part of the brain that thinks. So it's really getting people understand that there's something known as cognitive diversity. People think differently. Logic and analysis is just one way of thinking. And to be able to start building up that skill and technique of listening to different styles of people and bringing that intelligence in, and also being able to expand their own way of thinking. All of us have got a preferred style of thinking, but to expand our own styles, that's when they start becoming more resilient, because they're not just basing themselves on one way of thinking, which is logic and analysis. So that's another element that I work with leaders. And then, of course, the most important element, actually, the most basic element is the mind-body connection, is to pay attention on what are the lifestyle habits that leaders have, especially today when you have leaders who are jet-setting around the world or working at different time zones. You can imagine that was never the way that a body was created when it was evolving. It wasn't supposed to be like awake at weird hours and talking with people at different parts or zipping from one time zone to another time zone. It's a different way that we live today. So really some of those lifestyle habits become important because they become the foundation. Because no matter whether, so I can be very good in managing my emotions and using my intuition or my logic and analysis. But if I haven't slept well for a few days, my decision making is never going to be good. So, it's really,
Oh, yeah,
the
for sure.
fundamental core has to be health. So those are the different, some examples of things that I work with leaders so that they can really start operating at a different level. And I think so that's the opportunity that we have right now in the world of AI and technology, the way that we're moving ahead.
Yes, yes. So, Rina, let's talk about inclusion. How can applied neuroscience help create more inclusive and empathic leadership, especially in global or diverse teams?
I think there are two elements to it. One is to talk about this whole concept I said about cognitive diversity. Diversity and inclusion, of course, are two different things, as we well know. Diversity is just differences. And often we think differences is to do with how we look, our gender, where we come from, and all of that is really, really important. But there are two new things that are coming into our awareness in the business landscape, which is important in defining diversity. One is neurodiversity, is to really recognize that the way that people think can be quite different. So the concept of neurotypicals versus neurodivergent people, for scenarios such as autism, ADHD, that is now we're finding more and more those people coming into the workforce. And it's really kind of just be inclusive and open to how people think differently and how they decide differently. And the social interactions that they have is very different. So, even if that goes a layer much beneath culture, gender, age, and all of those elements. So, by just being a little bit more acutely aware about the different ways that people make decisions or think, I think this is an important part in today's day and age, which can be leveraged in the world of AI. And on the other side is when I was talking about emotions, is to really learn how to be much more empathetic. So, to have the empathy circuits working in a much better way so that we can empathize how other people are feeling. And that can simply happen by us asking other people how they're feeling. So, one of those magic questions that I talked about earlier is, how are you feeling about this particular scenario? And being open for a person to say how they're feeling. So, creating safe spaces for people to be able to express how they are feeling becomes fundamentally important to creating what we call psychological safety and trust. And psychological safety and trust, when that starts coming into the environment, what we have seen, and there's a lot of research that shows that what spikes up are things like innovation. What spikes up are things like employee engagement and retention. What spikes up is health and well-being in organization. What spikes down is stress and burnout. So there is a huge benefit of re-looking at diversity and inclusion just through these two lenses. There are many, many more elements, but I would highlight these two elements because they're right now being lost out. The whole thing about really welcoming the way people think, whether they and in the whole neurodivergent community, which is made out of neurodivergent as well as neurotypical people, but also to be able to be a little bit more empathy and allow space for emotions in the workplace. Very difficult, but leaders who are doing it are finding that actually that becomes their superpower.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I think, don't you think that we have to be aware of also these data sets, huge data sets that are getting into these AI systems, and also we have to be aware of bias and hallucinations that people that it's managing these kind of systems, we have to be really aware of this, right?
Yeah, the simple answer to that question is absolutely 100% yes. And I think people are already beginning to realize that there are hallucinations, there is bias that's creeping in. I think the invitation and opportunity that I would say to the efforts that people are doing at this moment of time to address it, because its dangers and challenges are well known, right? We know, therefore, AI will give us solutions which are limited. which will not serve the entire population, which will not serve all kinds of people. So we know the challenges associated with it, and we know companies are making an effort around it. So my invitation would be that can we look at responding to how we equip AI, because we will need to give information to AI, or by looking at other ways of thinking. So remember I talked about the non-linear thinking. So we ourselves need to look at how can we as human beings reduce our intuitive sense of bias, because the brain actually is designed to make biased decisions. Because the reason why we make bias from a human brain perspective is because we feel safe. And remember, one of the things we talked about is the brain does not like things that are unsafe, because if it is unsafe, it goes into a survival mode and a fight, flight, freeze. Whereas if something is similar, such as the kind of people I work with, or the kind of assumptions that I have, or legacy systems, that's the reason why people resist to change, or the things like affinity bias, whereby we like people who think like us or who act like us. These are all biases because the brain finds that it's very comfortable, because it's safety.
Wow.
And that's one of the things that the brain likes to do. So the brain is designed to be biased. And so when we are trying to feed information to AI through different ways, because then AI, as you very well said, crunches the information, it comes up with a biased model because the input has been biased. So therefore, we need to take a step back and say, how is it that we can give AI information which is unbiased? And that comes from what I was saying as non-linear thinking, whereby we are thinking not just logic, we're looking at different ways that people think, bringing in the thinking processes of other people, bringing in intelligence from emotions, bringing intelligence from intuition, bringing intelligence from nature, bringing in intelligence from mind-body connection, bringing all of that intelligence rather than logic and analysis. So I think so we are our input has to be far more than what we are doing at this moment of time to be able to combat that. I think so that's one particular element that I would bring in. And where hallucinations are concerned, I think so to some extent that's also been taking place about the way that we're inputting data. Now, I don't know much about hallucinations from a technical viewpoint, but again, I think so it is our gift to see what kind of checks and balances that we can put into place before we accept the data that comes to us.
Yes, you're right.
That again comes from us remembering that we are driving, human beings are driving AI. AI is not driving human beings. So we need to remember that AI is augmenting our decision making. It's not making decisions that we should be making. I think that's the differentiation. So if we have that mindset, we need to understand that the ability that we have as human brains to decide is far superior than AI when we go non-linear. If we are going to go down the linear path, which is logic and analysis, then my understanding is that AI is far better than human beings on logic and analysis, because we have fed it the information on logic and analysis of many people, because that's what we're trained to do. So it's picked up that data and become an amazing, it has an amazing ability to do that. It's like the logic and analysis of 7 billion people. If that's fed into a machine, imagine the kind of, and that becomes one entity, the logic and analysis it can do is much superior than one human being or 1 million human beings. But if we remember that actually human beings are far more than linear thinking, then it's a different way of looking at it. So I think that's the other reflection I have to, very good point that you made.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's how AI and ethics comes in, right? Because we have to apply these principles, especially in this kind of fields. So, Reena, AI is transforming how leaders manage time, manage teams, and even thinking. How do you see neuroscience and AI coexisting to build better leaderships in the next decade?
Hmm. Um, For me, I think the opportunity that's there is, let's take a step back. One of the words that's used right now, if we just look around, and I'm thinking about what are the challenges that we are facing right now in the world. And one of the words that's often used by a lot of individuals, and it certainly has become quite popular right now in the 2020s, is the era of polycrisis, which is, a polycrisis is really about where systemic challenges are influencing and being influenced by each other. So it's a spiral effect that's taking place. So when you think
Mhm.
about the socio-economical problems that we are facing, or the energy crisis that we're facing, or the climate crisis that we're facing, or the population problem that we have, or the pollution problem that we have, or the food problem that we have, or the inequality that's existing. Like, these are real challenges that are taking place, right? Now, we do know that AI and tech can come up with some amazing solutions to address those problems. So, straight away, leaders should, at a macro level and at individual people who are making decisions at company, recognize that actually AI and tech can help us sort out that problems, because it can come up with solutions that we might not be able to do, because it can do this amazing data modeling and strategy modeling and all of those lovely stuff it can do. So that's one way that we can partner. However, that requires, and I'm going to tease a word out that you use, it requires us to really up our own understanding and application of ethics, of being able to really answer the question, why is it as human beings we are unable to solve out those big problems that we've been seeing? So we know, for example, there have been 28 COPs thus far, but we still know greenhouse emissions are taking place. So it's really asking ourselves honestly the question, what is the reason behind our failure to do some of those changes? And what's the reason behind the reason behind the reason? Like, really dig deep, and we'll realize that the issue is that we're really not being ethical. We're not being honest and truthful. And that's something that we can do, AI cannot do, as you correctly pointed out. So if we can, as human beings, amplify our own ability to think ethically and then call on AI to come and do the heavy lifting, we can come up with solutions to address these problems at this moment of time. So I think so that's another great way of looking at how AI and the human brain can really complement each other at this moment of time. And at an individual level, as I was mentioning earlier, and I'd love to bring that up again, is really for the AI to, for individual leaders to think about, how can we really use a whole brain system, and
Mhm.
then look at how we can engage with AI, which does, as you correctly said, the data crunching, the analysis, and all of that lovely stuff that it does. And if we combine both of those together, I think there's a huge opportunity for us. So I think so. Those are some thoughts that I have on what the opportunity is there at this moment of time in today's day and world, how AI and humans can really complement each other.
Insightful. So insightful, Rena. So, Rena, you recently launched a coaching service for midlife women leaders. What unique brain-based challenges and strengths do they bring to the leadership table?
So this was a project that I took on about a couple of years ago, because one of the things that I recognize from a neuroscience perspective is that how we think affects our body, and our body affects the way that we think. So it's a combined process. They kind of complement each other, but they also influence each other. And one of the things that women experience in midlife is a concept known as menopause. And when menopause takes place, which is basically when their menstruation cycle stops, the hormones change in their body. And when the chemicals change in the body, it impacts the way that they think, and it impacts their energy levels. And so I was curious to really understand from a neuroscience perspective, what is the opportunity and how can this be changed from a challenge into an opportunity? And my research, and I researched more than 350 women and then did webinars and did projects of training women around it, is A, for them to become aware of the signs of what their body is experiencing and be able to do two things. One is stress regulation, because during midlife transition, especially when they're having this biological change in their body, one of the things that goes up big time in the body, the hormones, is cortisol, which is, as we know, a stress hormone, and which is why you have women who sometimes experience high bouts of emotions. And they also experience things known as brain fog, which actually begs the question is how do they calm down that emotional experience that they're having, which affects the way that they think. And so when we were teaching them techniques to regulate their energy and also to be able to calm down their brain at such a time, they actually realized that midlife is an amazing opportunity because they get the opportunity to do two things. One is to actually, when they start using the whole brain system, they realize that the amount of wisdom that they've created, because midlife would probably be 40s or 50s. I know that it keeps changing which decade it belongs to. But no matter what, by then people have had at least 10, 20, 30 years of work experience. And so they can really draw upon that wisdom and experience. And so then their quality of decision making and their quality of leadership can pivot and become far better because they've learned how to manage the neurobiology that their body is experiencing, which is affecting their brain or their ability to make decisions. So really training them from some of the lifestyle habits they have, whether it might be the food that they're eating, the hormones that they're supplementing themselves with, or the practices that they have, or techniques such as Neurocircuit Breaker that I was talking about, is to really use that ability. And the second interesting opportunity that is there, which is actually true not just for midlife women, but also for midlife men. It is true for anybody going through a transition. So it could be a career transition because midlife is a transition phase. So it could be a career transition. If you could think about leaders and entrepreneurs who are moving from startup to scale up, which is a transition moment. Any transition moment, what happens from a brain perspective, as a brain reacts to it as a threat because the parameters are changing. And when something is changing at an auto reflex level, the brain is reacting with threat. But what happens is that when our body and brain is reacting to threat, what it brings to the surface is some of the assumptions, some of the beliefs, some of the, the narratives that we have inside the brain, which impacts confidence levels, which impacts the way that we make decisions, the way that we connect with others. All of those come to the surface, which usually is hidden in the subconscious. Because as per neuroscience, we know that 95% of decisions that people make today is actually sitting in the subconscious level. So all of those things which are in the subconscious comes out because the body is under stress. And so from a neuroscience perspective, what we do is that we use that data which is actually hidden of saying, how might you respond differently? Or what are the techniques so that you can be more confident? What are the techniques so that you can think better in this kind of a scenario? So data points or blind spot or weaknesses which were hidden comes to the surface during any transition time. And so we get that opportunity to really flex and expand the leadership styles and skills of a person so that they can start doing things differently. So that's the other opportunity, I think, so that not just midlife women experience, but anybody going through transition experiences, and to use that as an opportunity. So they don't see it like a fearful, oh my gosh, I'm going through a difficult time, but they see it like, yeah, it's a difficult time, but what's the opportunity or what's the gift that this transition is bringing to me, which I would not have access to if I didn't have this transition happening in my life. So
Oh,
I guess
Reena, that's quite impressive. Yeah. So, Reena, is there anything that you would like to say to our followers? Maybe invite to you some projects or something that like that you have to.
I think what will be so, as you well know, and as your listeners will probably be quite aware of it by now, is that I'm quite passionate on the subject of neuroscience. And I think the reason why I feel leaders might want to look at understanding how the brain works and to leverage that so that they can make better decisions, I think is one of the smartest moves that leaders can do to make sure that they themselves and their teams are aware of it. Because once you know how the brain works, then you will create solutions, you will create projects, you will create systems, you will create people facing functions and strategies which are brain friendly rather than something that is going to get people to resist. So, having that insight and knowledge about the science of how the brain works and to bring in those practices into everyday leadership behaviors, into people functions, into strategies could be quite a useful thing. So, that would be my invitation to leaders. And if there's anybody who's interested to know more about it, I'd love to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, that's great. So, Rina, thank you so much for such a powerful conversation. You remind us that in the world obsessed with the speed, dashboard, and AI, the real competitive edge is still a human brain. Train, focus, and connect with purpose. For those listening, make sure you connect with Rina on LinkedIn, check out her book, The Brilliance Quotient, and dive into the applied neuroscience method if you're serious about leading smarter and scaling faster in this AI era. And remember, AI doesn't replace leaders, it amplifies them. It's your brain, your clarity, and your humanity that makes the difference. This was an AI to the Sky. I'm Joseph Bale, and see you on another episode. Thank you so much.
AI is evolving. Are you? Subscribe now or get left behind. AI to the Sky podcast.